Theologians and philosophers of religion have offered various types of theodicy throughout history. So recall that a theodicy is an attempt to show that the existence of evil in the world is compatible with the existence of an all-powerful, all-knowing, morally perfect God. And one of the theodicies that they've offered relies on the idea of free will. So they'll say things like the evil in the world is a necessary condition for us to enjoy the types of choices that we enjoy. So this is exactly the type of strategy that Richard Swinburne offers in the piece that I had you read for today. So today we're going to zoom in on the free will theodicy. All right, so Richard Swinburne is a professor of philosophy at Oxford, and his argument goes like this. If the existence of evil is a necessary condition for the existence of a deep good, then the existence of evil is justified. The existence of evil is a necessary condition for us having free and responsible choice. Free and responsible choice, Swinburne argues, is a deep good. Therefore, the existence of evil is justified. Now, I should note before I go on, Swinburne's going to try to show that the existence of an all-good God is compatible with the kind of evil we see in the world. And recall that Ivan thought that he didn't want to try to understand why the kind of evil and suffering he sees in the world, he didn't want to even try to justify it. He thought it was morally wrong and inappropriate. Swinburne, on the other hand, so he recognizes this worry right at the beginning. So he says, it is inevitable that any attempt by myself or anyone else to construct a theodicy will sound callous, indeed totally insensitive to human suffering. Many theists as well as atheists have felt that any attempt to construct a theodicy evinces an immoral approach to suffering. Here I feel like he's speaking directly to Ivan's concern. I can only ask the reader to believe that I'm not totally insensitive to human suffering and that I do mind about the agony of poisoning, child abuse, bereavement, solitary imprisonment, marital infidelity as much as anyone else. True, I would not in most cases recommend that a pastor give this chapter to victims of sudden distress at their worst moment to read or for consolation, but this is not because its arguments are unsound. It's simply that most people in deep distress need comfort, not argument. Yet there is a problem about why God allows evil, and if the theist does not have in a cool moment a satisfactory answer to it, then his belief in God is less than rational, and there's no reason why the atheist should share it. So Swinburne says, I know that, suffering is terrible, and the types of suffering in the world are many and profound. But if we want belief in God to be rational, then we need to mount some sort of defense, show how the idea of God and the way we think about him and the types of evil and the extent of evil we see in the world is compatible. All right, so now back to his argument. So Swinburne has a number of terms he needs to define here. He needs to define evil. He needs to define what a deep good is as opposed to a regular or shallow good. And he needs to define what he means by free and responsible choice. So, the form of this argument is valid, but if it's going to be sound, then the premises have to be true. And if the premises, in order to see if the premises are true, we need to learn the definition of these terms, according to Swinburne. All right, so first, evil. By evil, Swinburne means what he says positive bad states. For example, or in essence, suffering. So there are relative bads, like it's a bummer that I missed out on watching my favorite show last night. That's a relative bad compared to what I was doing. which was working. So it could be that I was watching my favorite show, or it could be that I was working. And I enjoy working, but I really wanted to watch my favorite show. So that's a relative bad, right? But by evil, he means positive bad states, or what we might say absolutely bad states, like suffering, like things that make us worse off than we normally are, right? He divides evil up into two types, and this is useful for his free will defense. The first is moral evil, which is evil caused deliberately by humans doing what they ought not to do, and by humans neglecting to do what they ought. And one move that Swinburne makes here is he makes this category of moral evil much bigger than we might normally think of it. So he thinks of much of the suffering which comes after, say, something like a hurricane. Some of it's natural evil, which we'll get into, but a good portion of it is moral evil. We didn't help in ways that we could have, right? So an initial move that Swinburne makes here is making this category of moral evil very big. So people starve to death. That's not because of lack of food, it's a distribution problem. We need to get food to them, and we need to make more efforts to do that, right? So many of the things we would normally think of as natural evil, Swinburne wants to say those are actually moral evil. So natural evil is just whatever is not moral evil. So evil not caused deliberately by humans or by human neglect. So this would include, like, you're walking down the street and a branch falls on your head, right? Natural evil. A deer gets its foot trapped and it can't escape and it starves to death. This would be natural evil. So the initial damage that a hurricane might do, natural evil. Now, normally, free will theodicy has quite a bit of difficulty explaining how natural evil is consistent with an all-powerful, morally perfect God. Because the free will theodicy general strategy is free will is such a good thing that it's worth us doing bad things to each other. But how can we explain natural evil in terms of free will, or justify it by free will? Swinburne thinks he can. So what does Swinburne mean by a deep good? Recall that was in the first and third premise. So a deep good is a good which we would choose to have even at the cost of having great suffering. Swinburne gives two examples here. So what he calls free and responsible choice, and then another good, being of use. Both of these are deep goods, things that we would choose to have even at the cost of having great suffering. So he distinguishes these from, like, pleasurable things, like the pleasure I might get from watching a good show, right? Or riding a roller coaster, or something like that. Those are shallow goods. In order to ride a good roller coaster, I wouldn't incur a bunch of suffering to do that, right? It's nice if I can do that, but it's not that valuable. It wouldn't qualify as a deep good, the kind that Swinburne's talking about. We'll get in, so let's talk about what he means by free and responsible choice, and we'll get to being of use. So free and responsible choice, he says, is the ability to do what you wish and have your actions affect yourself and others for good or ill. So we'll get to this later in the semester, this connection between free will and responsibility. It's been emphasized quite a bit throughout the history of philosophy and religion that it seems that free will is a necessary condition for moral responsibility, because, look, if you're just doing what you're programmed to do, not clear that you're morally responsible. Like, I might get angry at my phone for not working, but it doesn't make sense to hold it like morally responsible for not working, because it's just doing what it's programmed to do, right? We think humans, on the other hand, especially adult human beings, if they do something wrong, they could be morally responsible for it. In other words, we might be justified in being upset with them, and maybe even resentful. So now, note how much Swinburne has already done with his argument here. If free and responsible choice requires that we're able to affect other people for good or bad, then it does seem like moral evil is a necessary condition for that. At least it's hard to understand how we could affect each other for good or bad without moral evil being a possibility, right? So, does seem like, at least on our understanding, that free and responsible choice is a necessary condition. Moral evil is a necessary condition for free and responsible choice. Is free and responsible choice a deep good? That's the sort of thing that Swinburne will have to prove to us. All right, so first of all, do we have free and responsible choice? We'll look deeper into this idea. Do we have free will in the next section of the class? But can we help and harm others? Can our decisions affect other people? And Swinburne says, look, to an insane degree, we can, not to an insane degree, to a huge and wonderful degree, we have this free and responsible choice. So we can help or hurt other people, very obviously. But we have free and responsible choice, Swinburne wants to say, to the degree that we can change our own desires. Like, our desires often lead to our actions, but we can change our desires by changing our habits, things like that. So not only can we make it so our choices are based on our desires, but we can change what those desires are. Also, he says, we are responsible for each other to the degree that we are evolving the capacity to wipe out the existence of free and responsible choice for everyone from the universe as far as we know it, right? With the technology we have, our decisions have such import that should things go catastrophically wrong, we could end human life, right? So things could go really badly. So now here's the crux of the argument. Could God give us free and responsible choice without allowing evil? And here Swinburne says, no. We might be worried about that. But before we get to the worry, let's let him build his case. He gives an analogy of a father allowing his elder son to babysit his younger son. And imagine that the father said, look, I'm leaving you responsible for your baby brother. You're in charge. I'm going out for a bit. And then the son's in charge. The elder son is in charge, and the elder son is about to make a mistake. And right when he's about to make a mistake, the father, who secretly was watching from a camera, jumps back in, runs back in the house and stops him from making the mistake. Swinburne says, look, the elder son would have reason for a complaint. The elder son could say, look, you said I was responsible. You said things were up to me, that I was in charge. But you aren't really leaving me in charge if you're going to intervene and stop me from doing what I'm going to do. So this is Swinburne's case, that in order to have free and responsible choice, you have to have the ability to help or harm the people you're with. And if somebody were to intervene at any time, then we wouldn't really have that responsibility. Now, why might you be worried about this? You might be worried about it because, recall, in the initial argument, in the problem of evil, we said God was omnipotent. Then he has the power to eliminate evil. And recall that what omnipotent means is the ability to do anything. So if we ask Swinburne, can God do something specifically? Can he give us free and responsible choice without allowing evil? And when Swinburne says no, we might be thinking, oh, you just gave up the idea that God is all-powerful. Game over, you lose. The God that we thought existed or we would like to exist doesn't exist. He's not all-powerful, right? Now, Swinburne doesn't delve into it in this paper, but a move that theologians have used here is they'll say things like, well, God is omnipotent. He can do anything that's possible, that's conceptually possible. Like, you want God to come down here and walk on water? Fine, he can do that. You want God to perform all sorts of miracles? Fine, he can do that. But you want God to make a triangle that has 4 sides? That's conceptually impossible. Like, that's not in the realm of the possible. That's not anything that any being can do. But if a being can do it, then God can do it. So this is a way that theologians have rescued the idea that God is all-powerful, or in a sense, even though he can't give us free and responsible choice without allowing us to do evil. Now, Swinburne goes a little further on this, and he says, in order to make moral evil a possibility, God needs to give us a system of desires which can lead us away from the best course of action. Reason always would lead us to the best course of action, so we need desires to do bad things. And isn't it great that God gave us desires to do bad things? Now, to me, this veers off a little bit into the, look, everything the way it is the best way it possibly could be. I don't know. This part isn't so convincing to me. But the free and responsible choice, the allowing evil as a necessary condition, does seem pretty good to me. All right, so this still leaves a big question, though. So far Swinburne has said being able to do evil is a necessary condition for having free and responsible choice. And great. That's a great thing for the people who have free and responsible choice. But think about the cases that Ivan brought up. Ivan brought up the case of children who are suffering at the people who are misusing their free and responsible choice to harm them. Think about the little girl who's suffering at the hands of her parents, right? What do we have to say for that person? Because it seems unjust, as Ivan goes at lengths to point out, that this edifice of human good and enjoyment of the world, and even deep good, would be built on the unjustified, unredeemed suffering of children in some cases, right? So what's in it for the people who are suffering? And this is where we might think that Swinburne, maybe there's some lack of empathy here. But here's how Swinburne attempts to do it. Recall, he's making his best attempt to try to say that belief in an all-good, all-powerful, all-knowing God is rational, even with the evil we see in the world. So he says being of use is a deep good. Now this sounds especially bad when we're thinking about that little girl that Ivan brought up, who's suffering at the hands of her parents. Now we're going to say being of use is good, that it's good for her, that she's enabling her parents to have free and responsible choice. That sounds horrible. It sounds horrible. But how might we get just a little bit of an idea of what Swinburne's talking about here? Is being of use a deep good? Set that case aside for a minute. So is it the kind of thing that people are willing to suffer to take on? Think about the struggles that people in various countries, marginalized people in various countries have undergone to get the right to join the military, right? And think about what being in the military means. It means, look, you very likely will suffer. Why is that a good thing? Well, because what comes with it is maybe being of use to your country, or to the rich people in your country, at the very least, depending on your view of what the military actually does. But being of use it's something that people value to the extent that they're willing to take on great suffering and possibly even risk their own death, right? Think again of people who are trying to be in the military. Think about people who are going to have kids, right? Or there are many studies that show that new parents, there's a significant dip in happiness over the course of the first few years of parenthood. Why is that? Why do people do it? Well, because they're taking on responsibility, and also they're being of use to their child and maybe to their society. So people are willing to take on suffering if it means they can be of use. So it does seem like being of use is a deep good. So the sufferer is able to be of use to the people who can make her suffer, because it is through the vulnerability of the sufferer that the person causing her to suffer has free and responsible choice. Now again, if we're thinking of that child who's suffering at the hand of her parents, this sounds more than distasteful. It sounds like despicable, right? If we abstract more and think about, would we want the sort of world where we can make choices which are significant for each other, and where we can be of use to each other? If we abstract that way, then it seems like the answer to these questions is yes. If we focus in on a particular case, like Ivan's case that he presents, ooh, that feels really bad, right? We'll come back to this. We'll come back to this idea in the end. All right, so we're going to dig into it a little more here. Does God have the right to allow one person to suffer for another's benefit without asking? Because think about the case of the little girl suffering at the hand of her parents. Does God have the right to allow her to suffer so that her parents might enjoy free and responsible choice, or allow, everybody who suffers at the hands of other people to suffer at the hands of those people without asking them, hey, are you cool with suffering for this reason? It seems unjust, right? Like, oh, it's for the good of everything, but you particularly, you're going to have to suffer for it, right? Swinburne says, maybe we can think that God does have this right. He says, think about parents. If a parent, a parent might have a right to allow one child to suffer a little bit for the benefit of another child. So imagine that an older sibling and a younger sibling are playing. The parents recognize, ooh, the older sibling's getting a little rowdy, but every time we tell him, he doesn't listen. He's going to need to learn this, and he's going to need to learn it the hard way, and the younger child's going to need to suffer a little bit. So I'm going to step back and watch this happen. And sure enough, imagine the older sibling, not careful enough, does something, accidentally knocks over the younger child. Now, and then the parent steps in, is able to teach the older child a lesson. Now, is that justified? Because it seems like the way I told the story, they're allowing the younger child to suffer at the hands of the older child. Is that justified? That sort of situation probably is justified. Now, maybe it's justified because the younger child would benefit from that older child learning the lesson. And maybe if we build in being of use, then maybe there is some sense in which people who suffer are of use for people having free and responsible choice. Something else to consider here, God can't ask for permission. So it's not like we were born in another world before this one and God was like, hey, which kind of life do you want to live? Or at least we don't remember, right? So God just makes a world the way he does and puts people in it. He can't ask people what sort of life. Now, of course, here he's limiting God's power. Why can't he ask us? Well, because it's almost inconceivable. Our experiences shape us. How could he ask us? At which point would he ask us? It's very strange. But Another thing Swinburne says here is there are natural limits to the suffering a human can endure. Here again, sounding sounding pretty insensitive. We have a finite lifespan, so we're only able to suffer over a certain amount of time, and there are physiological and psychological limits to the amount of suffering a person can undergo. Of course, there are tremendous amounts of suffering that people can undergo, but you suffer enough, you go into shock, right? Or you die. And here, isn't it great that people die? So they can, it is, right? If people are going to suffer indefinitely, it's better that they die than suffer indefinitely. Swinburne will offer a thought experiment at the end. We'll see if he's done enough work to convince you. Or if an intuition that you have convinces yourself that he's right here. We'll see. But now we're going to switch from moral evil to talking about natural evil. Recall explaining why hurricanes happen and why a tornado hits somebody and hits people and kills them, or why a tree fell on somebody and why they died. Why is God allowing natural evil? Isn't there enough moral evil in the world that we should not be subject to natural evil befalling us? Swinburne takes the same defense. He tries to apply the free will theodicy to this problem of natural evil. So why is natural evil? What deep good does it lead to? Swinburne wants to say the same one that moral evil leads to. It gives humans more free and responsible choice. Now, how's that? How can we get more free and responsible choice from natural disasters happening, right? Swinburne says humans can learn from natural evil and create more evil ourselves. So we can learn from these horrible diseases that the world faces. We can learn to capture them and spread them if we wanted to. And why is that a good thing? Because it extends the range of our free and responsible choices. We're even more responsible for each other if we can do even more horrible things to each other. Secondly, it allows us to respond to it in especially significant ways. We can respond heroically to natural evil, right? Fires break out. Firefighters can respond heroically. And isn't the world a better place for having heroes and things, people that other people can look up to? One issue here is we might wonder, well, don't we do enough evil to each other? Why do we still need this natural evil? Like heroes, they could solve the moral evil issues and rescue people. Why do we also need to be able to respond heroically to natural evil? So is there just too much evil to justify that cost, right? All right. So Swinburne at the end of his article offers us a thought experiment to start thinking about whether or not God's actions in creating this world were justified. So here I want you to put yourself in the mindset of this thought experiment. So Swinburne says, to return to the central case of humans, the reader will agree with me to the extent to which he or she values responsibility, free choice, and being of use very much more than the thrills of pleasure or absence of pain. There's no other way to get the evils of the world into the right perspective except to reflect at length on innumerable, very detailed thought experiments, in addition to actual experiences of life, in which we postulate very different sorts of worlds from our own, and then ask ourselves whether the perfect goodness of God would require him to create one of these other worlds or no world at all rather than our own. But I conclude with a very small thought experiment which may help you to begin this process. Suppose that you exist in another world before your birth in this one, and you're given the choice as to what sort of life you are to have in this world. You're told that you are only to have a short life, maybe of only a few minutes. although it will be an adult life in the sense that you will have the richness of sensation and belief characteristic of adults. You have a choice as to the sort of life you will have. You can either have a few minutes of very considerable pleasure of the kind produced by some drug such as heroin, which you will experience by yourself and which will have no effects at all in the world. For example, no one else will know about it. That's one option. Or you can have a few minutes of considerable pain, such as the pain of childbirth, which will have, unknown to you at the time of pain, considerable good effects on others over a few years. You're told that if you don't make the second choice, the others will never even exist, and so you're under no moral obligation to make the second choice, but you seek to make the choice which will make your own life the best life for you to have led. So, there are some ways Swinburne sets up this thought experiment which I think sort of prime us to think one way. But imagine this. You're given the choice before you come into this world of a short life that will be very pleasurable, or a short life which will be miserable, and you won't know when you're going through that life that it's for some deep good for other people, right? Which life would you choose? Which life would be best for you? So you might think, well, I don't know, I'm not going to know that I'm being of use in the second life, so I want the first life, right? Or you might think something like, well, pleasure's nice, but so what? I'll take suffering that's meaningful, even though I don't know that it's meaningful. And why does Swinburne offer this thought experiment? This thought experiment is exactly the case of that little girl, right? She's, in Swinburne's view, being of use because she's allowing, her vulnerability allows free and responsible choice. Is that a good life? Now, why does Swinburne have to make this argument? Why do you have to say the second option for Swinburne? You have to say it because there's some, well, you might think differently, right? But in order for his argument to work, he has to get us to say that we would rather have the second life, because there are some people who suffer and who aren't able to enjoy the goods of free and responsible choice. So they're just being of use. And in order for Swinburne's argument to work, so has Swinburne pulled it off? Has he shown that the existence of free and responsible choice and being of use are such deep goods that we would take all the kinds and intensity of evil that we see in the world? All right, so jumping into quiz questions. Quiz question number, well, one more thing. If our belief in God is going to be rational, then Swinburne says answering the second choice to that thought experiment, and that the evil is justified in the world. If our belief in God is going to be rational, then we have to answer yes to that, or we have to lose one of God's omnipotence, his moral perfection, or his omniscience, right? All right, quiz question number 1. According to Swinburne, what are the deep goods for which the evil in the world is necessary? A, free and responsible choice and being of use. B, knowledge of good and evil and a chance to forgive. Or C, art and pleasure. Number 2. True or false? Swinburne thinks that natural evil cannot be justified by a free will theodicy. Is that true or false? All right, thanks for sticking this one out. Again, tough subject matter, but if our belief in God is going to be rational, then it seems like we have to deal with it, or give up our belief that our belief in God is rational. Maybe it's just irrational, right? Or give up belief in God, or change the qualities of God somehow. So those are our options. So again, thanks for sticking with me. See you next time.